politics. Secondly, on the 7th of June, multiculturalism and Australian identity, and Mr. Stephen Kekasharian was one of our speakers at that forum. Thirdly, terrorism and the death of democracy on the 24th of October, addressed by Danny Nalaya and Irfan Yusuf. Now tonight's topic, as advertised, is immigration closing the gates. That's a very topical subject. I'll repeat that, immigration closing the gates. You don't need me to repeat it because you've probably got it in front of you. And now our four speakers, as advertised, I'm sorry about this, but I didn't organise this. This is a form of sabotage unique to Parliament House. Our four speakers are Reverend the Honourable Fred Nile, MLC, Professor Andrew Fraser, Mr. Stephen Kekasharian of the Community Relations Commission, and Mr. David Oldfield. And when these four speakers have finished, questions will be invited hopefully there will be enough time for questions. Now when you ask your questions, keep them very brief and to the point. Keep them very, very brief indeed, because as it is, we're not going to have quite sufficient time for the questions we would like, but there will be no questions until all four speakers have finished, and then when that happens, after that at 9:30 there will be supper. Supper will be served at 9:30. Now the first speaker in our lineup is very well known to you, the Reverend Fred Nile, MLC. Now the Reverend Fred Nile was National Coordinator of New South Wales Director of the Festival of Light, 1974 to 81. He was elected to the upper house of New South Wales Parliament in 1981. From 1987, he represented the call to Australia. He was re-elected in 1991, 1999, and again in this year, 2007. He represents the Christian Democratic Party in the upper house. Now, he's been a well-known public speaker in Australia and overseas for over 40 years. He's got an enviable record of being a public defender of Christian values in Australia and overseas, and he has had a major impact on legislation in New South Wales. I'd like you to welcome Reverend Fred Nile, please.
Thank you, David. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for the opportunity to share with you for the 15 minutes that have been allocated to me to speak on the subject immigration closing the gates. But my topic is immigration, open the gates. Open the gates. What do I mean by that? Well, I've been proposing that we increase our immigration migration numbers from 120, in fact double them to 240,000, and that we increase our refugee quota from, I understand, about 12,000 to 25,000. So I'm all in favour of keeping the doors open so people can come to Australia from all nations, of all races, colours and cultures. But I've stressed, and I've put out a copy of a petition that I've prepared, it's got nothing to do with Round Table, it's not endorsed by them, or perhaps endorsed by any other political party, to give priority to Christians on the basis that I want to see Australia remain a Christian nation. And I know that can be debated, is Australia a Christian nation? I believe it is, and I've put a few facts on that petition sheet that you have, we put them on your seat, because I listed a number of relevant facts that support my proposition that we should favour migrants and refugees who are Christians, irrespective of their race or colour. So it's not a racist policy. Some people said that's a racist policy. It's not. And I've put on that petition some of these facts that our Australian Constitution acknowledges Almighty God. It says, humbly relying upon the blessing of Almighty God, and that is a Christian God. It's not referring to Allah or to Buddha or any other religious figure, but to the Christian God, the creator of the heavens and the earth. Our census indicates in the previous census, and I hope it will be as strong in the one that's been held, but the figures haven't been released, that 69% of our Australian population asserted that they were Christian on the census form indicating that they were Anglicans, Catholic, Baptist, Presbyterian. You add all those Christian denominations up, including, of course, all the large, huge numbers of people that have come to Australia who are Christians from non-Western nations. The thousands of people that come from Korea who are very strong Christians. In fact, many of them are stronger Christians than I am, that have come to Australia. There's probably 50,000 in Sydney. The Christians that have come from Lebanon, the Christians that have come from the Middle East, from Arabic countries and so on. From Vietnam, a large number of Catholics came from Vietnam. So that's the basis of that percentage. And also in our parliament every day, in both our federal and state parliaments, we start with Christian prayers, asking God's blessing on the parliament to guide and to direct us, that we will advance the glory of God and the true welfare of the people of New South Wales and Australia. And in the upper house, we actually say the Lord's Prayer that Jesus Christ taught to his disciples as a model prayer. We actually say it aloud, as do the members of Parliament in Canberra, in our federal Parliament. So that's part of our Christian heritage, and I could go on to give many, many other examples. And for that reason, to maintain harmony, cohesion in our nation, I believe that should be a priority for Christian refugees. There may be some exceptions, but that should be the policy, and I'm asking the Commonwealth Government to review our current Commonwealth immigration policy for that reason. One of the things that's concerned me and has provoked me, if you like, into taking a strong stand on this issue is that I do speak to many meetings made up of Christians that have come from other countries, Koreans, Arabic Christians, Assyrian Christians, and I hear this common complaint they make to me, that they have relatives, they have friends that are trying to come to Australia. They're applying to our embassies in Cairo and other places, and often they are interviewed by the officer in charge of the visas is a Muslim, and the Muslim actually rejects their application. Now this is not once. This could be over 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. I met a lady the other night at an Arabic church, an Arabic Christian church, and she said to me, I had been applying for 3 or 4 years, I'd been rejected, but the next person, a Muslim, was accepted. And she said, finally, I lost my temper. The last time, she said, I'm not going to leave here. I demand to see the ambassador. I'm being discriminated against. And she said, I made a big noise. And the lady, it was a Muslim lady who was handling her application, said, look, please, 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 don't make a big noise. She said, look, come back tomorrow, come back tomorrow. So she said, I went back tomorrow, and what happened? My application was approved. Now, she said, I shouldn't have had to do that. We should be treated without any discrimination. And so I'm saying we should be giving priority to Christians, and it seems like the system is actually rejecting them in coming to Australia. And I've had many others that have written to me and their relatives. I remember one other family of 2 Christian ladies whose other members of the family are here in Sydney, and they've been asking me to help them. These 2 ladies, as often happens in the Middle East, you become like a stateless person, and these nations keep shifting you around. You're trying to get to Australia, so for some months, maybe 6 months, they let you stay in Jordan. Then the officials say, no, you must leave. They say, where do I go? Well, that's your problem. You can't stay here any longer. And so these 2 women were sent then to Yemen. They're actually going from, from the frying pan to the fire. It was actually getting worse for 2 Christian women. They said, and they sent me the photographs, they said, we have to live and pretend we are Muslims. We can't live as Christian women. We have to go shopping wearing the Muslim gear and so on, like any other Muslim woman. And people shouldn't have to live in that atmosphere, in that condition. And yet that couple, those 2 women, have been rejected again in their applications. I was just talking to some of the Christians that have come from Iraq, and one man was very anxious. He said, Fred, you've got to help my village. My village is 2,000 people. I thought he wanted me to help his family. He said, I want you to get the village here. There's 2,000 people in the village, and the Muslims are attacking the people in the village, threatening them. say, unless you convert to Islam, then we'll take your life. If you don't convert, you must leave your home. Take nothing with you. Just walk out. Don't sell your house. Not sell it to another Muslim person. Just walk out and leave your possessions. Otherwise you'll lose your life. And this man was really terrified for his family and relatives and the clan, you could say. And I said, how many? He said, 2,000. I said, I don't know, I get 2,000 people to come to Australia. And we'll do anything. If we're intelligent people, we're educated people, we'll do anything. And we would work hard. We'd be an asset to the nation. Now that creates a major problem for our immigration policy. And of course, I've just heard of a large suburb in Baghdad where, again, the people have been terrorised in the same way and threatened to leave. I've heard another report, and I believe these reports, they're first-hand reports, where some of the Christians have been forced to flee from Iraq for safety into Syria. And again, they're not often welcome in Syria. And Syria said, after a short time, you must go back to Iraq, and forced them back across the border, waiting for them across the border where some of these Islamic terrorists who then attacked the 300 or so Christians. Just forced them back almost into a trap so their lives could be taken. So I feel very angry about that, and I believe our nation, as we sing in our national anthem, we have our planes, we're open to welcome people. Let's welcome people, especially those who desperately need help. Now the second part of that petition, and this is the controversial aspect, I raised the issue because of the potential for social disharmony, not that it's occurring in a major way in Australia at this moment, although there are signs of it, as we've seen, but certainly it's a very serious problem now in the UK, in France, in Holland, in the Scandinavian countries. And I believe we should step back and just see how we can avoid the problems that those societies are now having. I've done interviews with some of the people when I made my announcement about a moratorium on Muslim immigration for 10 years. I had actually people ringing me from the BBC in London and other countries in Europe saying, fancy someone proposing that. And the BBC normally would not be sympathetic to the views I was saying. But you know, the interviewer said, well, maybe we should have done that earlier, but it's too late for the UK. That's what they were saying to me on the radio program. It's too late for us. It's now an academic issue where we've got a massive problem. And what concerned me about that situation that's occurring, I've been able to get some a combination of surveys that have been taken in the UK amongst the Muslim community. Because there's one of the, I suppose one of the myths is that yes, there's a large population of Muslims, it may be 2 million or more, we're never quite sure how many. The Muslims claim we underestimate the numbers. When we say there's 350,000 in Australia, they say there's actually 1 million. And I understand there's 2 million in the UK, but they claim there's more than 2 million. It could be more in Australia because you could say the non-Muslim population birth rate is 1.7. It's just creeped up to 1.8. But I saw the official federal government figures for Muslim childbirth is 6.8. 6.8. So 1.8 versus 6.8. So I'm not talking about a situation we're facing today, but a situation we could be facing in 2010, 2020, 2030, 2040, 2050, where the Muslim population could in fact become even the majority population in Australia. Now, you may think that's an exaggeration, but I was speaking again at a big Arabic church in Bankstown, and I said in my talk, I've heard that some of the Muslims have a desire, and I suppose it's an innocent desire and a way for them to make Australia a Muslim country. That's a desire in the hearts of Muslims, and I just made in my talk a comment. I don't want it to happen, but maybe it could happen in 2030, and a chap in the audience jumped up and he said, I'm the pastor of the church, I'm a Lebanese Christian, and I've just come back from the Middle East. I've been over there doing study and travelling around. He said that's common talk, he said, in the marketplaces and other places in the Middle East, that the Muslims are boasting, we will have Australia by the year 2020. We'll have a majority Muslim population by 2020. Now I hope they're exaggerating, but when I was talking about some years way into the future, 2020 isn't so far away. But the alarming thing these surveys showed in the UK was a rejection of the myth that out of the total population, it's only really a handful of Muslims that are causing the trouble. Just a handful, might be 1%. But in the surveys that have been conducted, and these are reliable surveys, and I don't have the surveys with me, but if you're really interested, you could give me your name and address and I'll have them sent to you after the meeting tonight. 9 surveys of British Muslims have been taken between November 2001 and February 2006. They have revealed an alarming situation. For example, support for terrorist activity after the New York attack, 9/11, was 15% out of the 2 million, 15%. After the London bombing, you remember how they bombed the railway trains on 7th of July, the support was 7%. These are Muslims saying, we support the bombing of those innocent British passengers going to work. Then 8.5 favoured these past attacks and further actions representing hardcore support for terrorism. 24% sympathised to some degree with the motives of the London suicide bombers. 31% regarded British Jews as legitimate targets. 31%. And then 40% said they support some form of Islamic Sharia law being introduced into the United Kingdom. And finally, those who feel not much or no loyalty towards Britain, 16%. So they're the signs of serious trouble, both now and in the future. I don't want to see those problems occur in our country here in Australia. And we should learn from the problems that are occurring in the United Kingdom, in France and Holland and so on. Give the Muslims time to reconsider their position in Australia and to adopt this policy that we have no desire to establish an Islamic nation within the Australian nation. We want to simply be Australians. We want to be assimilated in the Australian nation. And this 10-year moratorium is to give them the opportunity to do that. If they can't bring about that change of attitude, then maybe the moratorium would have to continue. But I would hope there be some change. And some folk here tonight may say that's impossible by the nature of the Islamic religion, which is a religious political movement. It's different to Buddhism, Hinduism, the Sikh religion. The Islamic religion is a religion, it's a religious political movement. And that's a dilemma we have in how do we deal with it. And so I thank you again for the opportunity to share with you tonight. I'm pleased that the citizenship test has been introduced, and that does include a question that indicates that new citizens should accept the fact that our nation is based on Judeo-Christian values. And I'm pleased that the federal government has introduced that concept, if you like, into that test. And David, in his introduction, said that this organisation, one of its aims is to promote the dignity and liberty of every person. That's what I want to do. Whether the Islamic religion will allow us to do that is something you have to weigh up for each person. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reverend Niall, because now we know why you have a reputation for being a politically cutting-edge voice in the House. You can express a policy which has got international ramifications in a clear and concise way, so that everybody knows exactly where you are at. And that's an admirable ability in the world where there's maybe too much verbiage. Now, our second speaker is well known, Professor Andrew Fraser, a scholar, writer, educator, and a public speaker. He's a former Associate Professor of Law at Macquarie University. He's lectured in the history and philosophy of law and public law, and American constitutional history, and also immigration and race relations. His books include The Spirit of the Laws and Reinventing Aristocracy. His current research project is Anglo-Saxon Anglophobia, Its Causes and Cure. He was born in Canada, and please welcome Professor Andrew Fraser.
My basic premise is that the White Australia policy was a great idea, and it was a terrible mistake to abolish it. The question then is, why was it abolished? I suppose the short answer to that is that we have a managerial regime that is dominated by a cosmopolitan elite that has no particular loyalty to any nation at all, and really believes in deconstructing the borders that define our nations. Now, the legitimacy of that regime, in my view, is based upon deceit and fraud. And nowhere is that more evident than in the area of immigration policy. So that's what I want to talk about tonight. Essentially, I want to structure my argument in the following way. I want to talk about, first of all, the big lie underlying our present immigration policy. Then I want to talk about the bigger lie involved in it. And finally, I want to talk about the biggest lie of all that's associated with our present immigration policy. The big lie is that our immigration policy is based upon the principle of non-discrimination. That is just simply and self-evidently not true. As Jeffrey Blaney pointed out over 20 years ago now, a minister for immigration is a minister for discrimination. The only way you can avoid discrimination in immigration policy is either to allow everybody who wants to come to Australia to come in, or to allow nobody to come in. Any in-between position requires that you let some people in and refuse entry to others. If your immigration policy is based upon admitting skilled migrants, you're basically discriminating against unskilled migrants. If you're in favor of family reunion, the reality is that you are discriminating in favor of peoples and cultures that are associated with extended families. Whereas most Northwestern Europeans, British, white Americans, white Canadians, really have grown accustomed for these many thousands of years to living in nuclear families, and the last thing a migrant from Canada like myself wants to do is bring my brother here. So it's just not, but there are lots of people in China or Iraq or wherever who would love to bring not only their brothers, but as Reverend Niles says, their whole village. And so that if you allow that sort of thing, so the upshot of this really is that when the Minister for Immigration is putting together his package and his policies, there are going to be certain consequences, and clearly the consequences of the immigration policies that have been adopted over the past 40 years in Australia have actually discriminated against white European immigration. I mean, all you need. When I went to law school, I learned that a person is held to intend the natural and ordinary consequences of their actions. The natural and ordinary consequences of present immigration policy is essentially to replace white Australians with people from the third world. In my view, that is a terrible mistake. Of course, the response is, oh, that's discrimination, to actually favor your own kind in discrimination. And so the bigger lie that's involved in immigration policy is that really, oh, well, you know, I mean, we may discriminate between skilled and unskilled, family and non-family, and so on. But really, the really bad kind of discrimination has to do with race, for example. And it's bad, apparently, because there are either, I never quite learned how to organize that thing, but either race doesn't exist, And so therefore, you shouldn't really make a distinction between people from here or people from there on the basis of just an obviously superficial characteristic like skin color. Or race does exist, but we're all just essentially equal. Now, this is a lie. For many, many years now, we have been encouraged to believe that bigger lie, but science, fortunately, is coming to our rescue. It is becoming undeniably clear that people of different races are different. They are different in terms of their cognitive abilities. Africans, to use one example, sub-Saharan Africans test regularly, no matter how many times you do the test and how you redesign the test. Their average IQ is somewhere in the region of 70 to 75. East Asians are somewhere in the area of 105. Ashkenazi Jews test out at around an average of 110. White Europeans are somewhere sort of around 100. That's where, the baseline has been set. Athletic ability. We all know that white people can't jump, apparently, because there's so many blind. But of course, actually, the Lithuanian basketball team may be putting the lie to that particular racial stereotype. But we do know that whites can swim better than blacks. And why is that? Basically because black people actually tend to have higher bone density. And so they don't float as well. So that's why they're not very good swimmers and so on. But East Africans are very hard to beat when it comes to long distance running. West Africans are very hard to beat when it comes to sprints and so on. So we know that these kinds of differences exist. Temperament. We know that, how many people know somebody from China? How many people observe those little Chinese kids who are so easy to get to go to coaching class on Sunday morning and Mandarin class on Saturday morning? No problem. But try to get a Sudanese kid to do that kind of regime, you're going to have a very tough time. Even white Australian kids would jack up at that. So, and there are obviously differences in adult temperament as well. One of the most important differences, however, between races has to do with in explaining, let's say, Reverend Niles' altruistic sort of approach. He basically is prepared to open the floodgates to people from anywhere, especially if they're a hard luck story. White people are more altruistic. That's why they're Christians. Other people are much more rooted in a culture that values ethnic solidarity. And that is a very important difference, because when you import people into your Anglo-Saxon country who are really conscious of their race and are determined to promote the interests of their race over your race, your whole political system changes. What you get is an ethnic or racial spoil system. And that's clearly what's happening to our political system. It's no longer a system where we just have individual citizens seeking to promote their own particular version of the public good. No, Anglo-Saxon or Anglo-Celtic Australians may still think in those terms. Dutch people may think in those terms. But I can assure you that the Chinese, the Sudanese, the Iraqis, and so on do not think in those terms. The Muslims certainly do not. Okay, so what is the biggest lie biggest lie of all is that discrimination is bad. This is the civilization destroying lie to end all lies. Because in fact, in Western societies, we know that we think of our society in terms of different levels of reality. We think of the political and legal realm. We think of the social realm. We think of the private realm. The thing about the public realm is that there, equality makes sense. You know, why should one person's vote count for anything and more than another person's vote? But we also don't allow just anybody to vote. You have to be 18. Before, not so very long ago, you had to be 21. Not so very long before that, you had to be male. You know, all of those kinds of things. The private realm is a realm which is really about exclusivity. I can do whatever I want. I can marry a black woman if I want, and you might not like it, but it's really my business. And because you may not like it, what that really suggests is that in society, the social realm is based upon the principle of discrimination. Okay, if you want to have a chess club, you are inevitably going to have to exclude people who want to play poker. Okay, I mean that's what being and this is not some radical right-wing idea. I mean the argument I'm making I first came across in the work of a woman, a New York Jew called Hannah Arendt. And she was making an argument in the 1950s, about segregation in the South. And she published this article in a left-wing magazine in New York, and it didn't make her very popular. But the essence of her argument was that education is a social thing. It's what parents do with their children. And if white parents in the South, let's say, in the 1950s, don't want to send their kids to a school with any significant number of black students in it, what is the problem? I mean, why shouldn't they be allowed to do that? That's what freedom of association is about. That's what a free society means. Similarly, she said, if I, as a Jew, want to go to a resort in the Catskills, which only allows Jews to stay there, what's the problem? You might not want to apply that principle to the Hilton downtown, but then that's okay, because the Hilton is kind of a public institution. It's not, nobody goes to the Hilton to hobnob with the other guests. It's just like, it's like being in a big airport, okay? There's no social kind of interaction that really goes on with the mass of the guests. And so the point is that the immigration policy is about maintaining the society as a whole. And we have the right, it seems to me, to exclude people who are not like us. And the test really, I mean, of course, we've been denied that right. And just to make sure that this mass third world immigration policy applies, discrimination on the social level has been outlawed. If diversity is so great, and if ordinary Australians are really so keen to live cheek by jowl with a Sudanese on one side and a Chinese on the other, I say abolish anti-discrimination laws. Allow people to, let's say, go back to restrictive covenants, where they can put a restrictive covenant on their deed saying, this house can only be sold to someone like me. And if people people really like, again, diversity. Well, nobody will take up that opportunity, but it seems to me what we need instead of anti-discrimination laws are pro-discrimination laws so that we can be a free people once again.
Thank you, Professor Fraser, for those challenging words. Now, our third speaker is Mr. Stefan Kekasharian. He was born in Cyprus and migrated to Australia in 1967. He established an Armenian radio program in 1976 and was a member of the State Ethnic Public Broadcasting Advisory Committee. In 1980, he was appointed head of SBS Radio, and in 1989, chairman of the New South Wales Ethnic Affairs Commission. He is president of the Anti-Discrimination Board since 2003. He was a member of the team which launched SBS TV in 1980. He's a member of the Order of Australia and of the Polish Gold Cross Order of Merit, and he is uniquely well qualified to discuss ethnic Australian issues at this meeting. Please welcome Mr. Stefan Kekasharian.
Thank you very much. I've actually got ready to talk about immigration and closing the gates, so I may not go into the ethnic side of things, but I'll be more than happy to take questions on that and involve myself in those discussions as well. I was actually fascinated to hear Professor Andrew Fraser, and let me say to Professor Fraser, you've got my unqualified support in your efforts to make sure that your brother does not come to Australia. Now, let me just say this about closing the gates. I'm reminded of this character, Middle Eastern character, who's called Nasreddin Hoxha, who was receiving regular complaints from his neighbors about his farm animals moving out of his area and grazing on his neighbors' lands. So to quell this discontent within his neighborhood, he did something really wonderful. He erected a gate and he put a padlock to it. And of course the neighbors were not happy because he never put a fence around his land. So when I thought about this subject matter, closing the gates, that's the kind of gate which came to my mind. Because we have to realize that if we're going to take this subject literally, closing the gates means stopping immigration into Australia. That's what it means to me. And we've heard today about discriminatory immigration policies, non-discriminatory immigration policies. We've heard about various characteristics, but let me just bring to your attention the following. Australia encouraged immigration for a very simple egocentric reason, and that was to fuel its economic development. There's no other reason for it. Because if you go back to the debates which took place in Parliament in 1901 during the establishment of the Commonwealth, it was very much intended that Australia will become the last bastion of the Anglo-Saxon ethos, and that no one would be allowed into this country. But I'm quite fascinated always when I look at some of those quotations and some of those speeches made during that debate, because the approach was not white supremacist. There was a clear acknowledgement that in fact the Englishmen might not be as superior as some of the migrants who came in. Our first Prime Minister, Edmund Barton, said, and I quote, "I do not think that the doctrine of the equality of man was really ever intended to include racial equality between the Englishman and the Chinaman. And then Deacon referred to this notion of unity, and by implication national security, when he said in Parliament, and I quote, "A united race means not only that its members can intermix, intermarry, and associate without degradation on either side, but implies one inspired by ideas and in aspiration towards the same ideal of a people possessing the same general cast or character, turn of thought, the same constitutional training and tradition, a people qualified to live under this constitution." Now, Deacon then went on to say the following, and I quote again, "The Japanese require to be excluded because of their high abilities. It is the business aptitude and the general capacity of these people that makes them dangerous, and the fact that while they remain an element of our population, they are incapable of being assimilated." So there was a sense of inferiority as well at the time. Now, we progressively lowered the barriers because there was a realization that to develop this huge continent, we needed people. Populate or perish.
Yeah, with why?
Australians?
This is what you're bringing.
Hey, no interruptions, please.
Yeah, that's okay. Look, I don't bring anyone in. I'll come to that in a minute. I don't bring anyone in. Populate or perish. Because people in Australia were afraid that they might perish if this continent is not populated. And therefore, immigration was encouraged from England. Even the first immigrants from Ireland were not welcome. It wasn't until Governor Macquarie changed the law that Catholics could hold masses, church mass, without permission from the government. The Irish people were not allowed to speak Gaelic. That was the extent of the laws of this country. But populate or perish, because